Dear God, we count it a joy to be together. We thank you for this wonderful long weekend and for this chance to add thanks to other Thanksgiving. Amen. I count myself very lucky to have been a resident, however briefly, of Rome quite a few years ago. A lot of times I went to view Michelangelo's paintings on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. And like everyone else, I especially loved, what was laid out there. It's wonderful pastels. It was so life-enhancing. I loved Michelangelo's colossal statue of David in Florence. And in Rome, I knew the serpentine way to the tiny church where his statue of the horned Moses was that you could view by yourself. And I thought his Pietà was maybe the single most beautiful thing he ever created. But still, I found myself going back to the Sistine again and again. God with God's arm gently wrapped around Eve, protectively as God creates Adam with God's outstretched arm. Eve's later portrayed there as taken from the man's rib. Not from his head so he'd rule her, or from his foot so he might abuse her, but from his side so he might love her with his heart. Whole thing is a vast celebration, of life lived in the flesh, a pictorial poem of biblical history. Now, Michelangelo finished that in 4 years in the year 1512. At its unveiling, he was immediately celebrated as the world's greatest living artist. And note that this was just 5 years before Martin Luther posted his 95 complaints against the Catholic Church on the door of the Wittenberg Church. Because of that fact, that beginning of the Protestant Reformation, 25 years later, Michelangelo would be brought back to paint the rear wall of the Sistine. Rome had just been sacked by Northern European Protestant troops, brainwashed to believe that the Pope was the Antichrist. And so to dissuade Catholics from joining the Protestant Revolution, Pope Paul III commissioned the Last Judgment. Do we have that slide? It took Michelangelo 7 years to finish this huge painting that covers that incredible wall. There are some pastels here, but not like on the ceiling. Much of it is dark. The color's unearthly. They appear to come from under the earth, in fact. And the reason I was in Rome was to teach a class on Italian Renaissance literature. And I took our class to see that painting when we covered Dante's Inferno. Because the Christ portrayed there is not the Good Shepherd, but look at him, he's huge. He's a great Jupiter throwing thunderbolts of judgment against the damned, those who have capitulated to the Reformation, a movement Catholics thought of as just a passing fad. Well, the whole painting is meant to scare Catholics straight, to dissuade them to leave Protestantism alone. It's a terrorism of a sort. The only creature in pastel is a lovely shade of blue that is abundant on the ceiling, but not so much here, and is worn by Jesus' mother Mary, who sits right beside her angry son. And look at her, poor Mary. She turns her head painfully aside because she can't bring herself to watch her formerly gentle boy throwing thunderbolts. We'll see that blue next week because that's when Advent begins, and the essential color of the season of Advent is that Mother Mary blue. Well, there are two camps here, just as in the parable from Matthew we are looking at this morning as well. But they do not stand to Jesus right and left like we heard in the parable. No, the righteous stand with him while the damned are below under his feet and under his disdain. It's a hard painting to look at, but fascinating nevertheless. And in any case, one should not forget that it marches right out of history. And for that reason, it's a very dated piece. Of course, it's going to live forever because of the person who painted it, but the ceiling is the painting for all time. It's a reflection of God's gracious heart. And I say all this by way of introduction because unlike Michelangelo's depiction of the Last Judgment, Matthew's story of the Last Judgment stands for all time. It's a complex painting of its own. And the closer you look at it, the more impressive and also disarming it is. I won't spend time belaboring the choice of sheep and goats in that poem. Some preachers go on and on about the characteristics of sheep as compared to those of goats and how that might pertain to a story about judgment. I don't buy any of that. Sheep are sheep, goats are goat, and Jesus just needed two different kinds of creatures to be herded around in his parable. He's not picky about poetic images. He just wants to make distinctions like, the wheat and the weeds, or the good seed and the bad, and the wise and the foolish maidens. And Matthew, the writer of this gospel, makes the point throughout his gospel that when it comes to our relationship with God, what's truly important is not having faith as much as doing faith. Watch out, he tells us, if you're not doing faith. So the trouble with preparing a sermon on a passage like this is that it can't be simply an intellectual exercise. It calls anyone who looks at it to be introspective. I mean, it is meant to make us ask ourselves, how do I measure up? I remember coming out of the Sistine many times out onto the streets of Rome and seeing a lot of Roma on the city streets. Those are the people we used to call gypsies. We were warned by locals not to give them money. They were said to twist the arms of their babies at birth in order to make them deformed and thus more likely to incite pity from tourists. I don't ever remember seeing children like that, not even one, but that was the story on the street. The Franciscan nuns, who were our particular guides in the Vatican, always gave coins to them every day, and also to anyone who asked. They said it was the Christian thing to do, so I was more confused than ever. Over the years, I've dealt with quite a few street people myself, and I remember some put you on your guard right away. Some were master storytellers. A few of them dragged their kids along, knowing that you wouldn't dare send them away with nothing. I never really knew if they were on the level or on the take. But Jesus' words in Matthew are not far from my mind, even as I might sigh exasperatedly over a few of them. I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to see me. So this text works on me in several ways. First, it softens me. I know some of these people are legitimately in need, maybe most of them. But I also begin to play a mental game with this text. I review the list and make mental notes about just what I've done to fulfill all the categories, right? Who was hungry, thirsty, homeless, sick, or in prison, and what did I do to cover that for my own soul's sake? In that way, I know I'm trying to make a law out of the gospel. Look, God, see what I did to fulfill your mandate. But if helping people becomes about me, it's not about helping anybody. Looking at the story, we see that both groups, the sheep and the goats, are totally baffled by the verdicts that they get. When was it we saw you hungry, Jesus? When did we visit you in prison? That's what they both say to the king. Did you get that? I mean, that's really critical. The sheep didn't know what they had done right any more than the goats knew what they had done wrong. which seems to suggest that God's ultimate judgment will take us all by surprise, sheep and goats alike. I want to make sure you see this. It's actually absolutely central to the parable. Both groups are totally shocked. For the characters in the story, the biggest surprise of all seems to be that Jesus is like what Google and Facebook want to be. That is, someone who knows what you're doing at all times without you knowing it. The sheep and the goats thought Jesus occupied only one space at a time. And so all that was important to them was how they behaved in Jesus' presence, right? Jesus' presence. He's far away in heaven anyway, right? Meanwhile, they have lots of time outside of church to behave around other people any way they really want. Except that Jesus says, when you have done whatever you do, good or bad, to the least of these, the little ones, you've done it unto me. Now, I was on study leave one summer in New Mexico at our Presbyterian camp there called Ghost Ranch. Craig Butler goes there every year. Anyway, one evening going through the cafeteria line for dinner, the staff was having some fun with us. In the beginning of the line was a bowl of cookies, and there was a sign there that said, "Take just one. Remember, God is watching you." And then down at the other end, past the entree, was a big bowl of apples with a sign that said, "Take as many apples as you want. God's down there watching the cookies." Not so in this parable. How we behave around the wait staff who serve us in restaurants, the customer service personnel we speak to on the phone, the panhandlers on the street is crucial. Why? Well, they're all of these, if we're to take this parable at all seriously, they're all Jesus in disguise. So work with me here. Let's say Jesus is present in some cosmic way in every one that we run into on a given day, especially the little ones, the last ones we might expect him to be. What of that? How does that inform our living? Where will we get the courage, in fact, to get up every morning knowing we're going to face him like that? All those people who want a favor for our attention. Well, one thing is sure, you can't fulfill this mandate like a to-do list. Checking off one hungry person there, a sick person there. Oh, I visited a prisoner once. You cannot toss $1 in a guitar case on the sidewalk and have it done. There, that's my good deed for the day, my ticket to heaven. The gospel is much too honest for that. It will not let us use people like that. Besides, emptying your pockets for those folks may not be the right thing to do for them anyway. See, this is complicated. The only way to tell if the eyes of those who stop us and ask us for help are really Jesus's eyes is to look into them, to risk the moment of recognition that may break your heart or change your mind or make you mad or make you want to mend your life. This is critical, that was the moment Mother Teresa said changed her completely. When after decades of helping people, she found herself on the streets of Calcutta looking into the eyes of one man who she could not help with a meal because he was dying. It wasn't the first time that happened, it was the first time she realized something. It was then that she realized that what was most important about the encounter was the contact. At that moment, she actually began to look into the eyes of these people, and there on the streets of Calcutta, she began to have moments of spiritual sight, moments when she began to see in the faces of the lost the face of Jesus. That seems to be the one thing that the sheep know how to do that the goats have absolutely no clue about. That helping people really is about looking at them, attempting to see who they are and whose they are. That's where you and I are called this morning to consider looking these folks in the eye. It was impossible to do in the pandemic, maybe, but now, well, there they all are again. And look, you can even do it on the phone by speaking to people we have to speak to, even on the phone. People, who may be working for Comcast in Bangladesh. You know those people. As if they were people with real feelings and lives of their own. When it comes to those in need, the food, the drink, the visit, all will follow in their good time. Helping is necessary, but without the looking first, it's just the hollow sound of quarters in a cup. Meant to buy Jesus off sometimes. I'm glad now that once, many, many years ago when I was in graduate school, I qualified for food stamps for about a year. I remember going in once about every quarter, every 3 months to renew my application. And what I remember most was how no one in the office would look me in the eye. I was just a case number. I was just a case. I need to remember that experience. It's absolutely crucial that I never forget that. In that moment of looking into someone's eyes, the promise of Christ is that we may find something there we need to know. Let me tell you something you already know. When you look into those eyes, sometimes what you see is your own helplessness, your own inability to know what is right. You see yourself sometimes in a stark new light. You may not want to hear that, but it's true if you're honest with yourself. Sometimes you see such gratitude that it reminds you how much you have this year to be thankful for on this Thanksgiving weekend. Thanks to Dawn and the kids for teaching us that. Sometimes when you look someone in need in the eye, what you see is such a wily will to survive that you cannot help but admire it. Even when you feel yourself being turned upside down and shaken by your ankles for all you're worth. See, these are the things that we need to know about Jesus and about our brothers and sisters and, yes, about ourselves. But we can't know them if we refuse to look. So finally, let's not forget one thing, one really critical thing. The goats, remember, are not condemned for doing bad things. They're condemned for doing nothing. They bore the hungry and the thirsty and the sick, no malice. They simply did not see any relationship between their lives and the lives of the least. Let me repeat that. They simply did not see any relationship between their lives and the lives of the little ones. This is exactly where we find the dividing line down the middle of our country today. Between those who say, we all just need to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps, and all the rest with real needs. I mean, think of the children who were put in cages at our southern border a few years ago. And look, nearly half the people in this country just ignored that as if it wasn't happening. As if it was okay separating them from their parents. This last week, I saw a meme on Facebook that said, if your version of Christianity wants to put prayer in public schools and take free lunch out of them, then you're worshiping something other than Jesus. What Jesus' parable is saying is that there is a relationship between every one of us and every little one, every child on this planet. And in that lies the good and the bad news today for us. And at the last day, when we will all find ourselves standing before the one who created us. It all stands to remind us of what Thich Nhat Hanh said, is the reason for our being here on the earth at all. I've quoted it before. He said, "We are all here on this earth to wake up from the illusion of our separateness." And the illusion that other people's lives and our lives don't touch, are not, based on, supported by everything mutual. So this parable is not an ethics lesson. Our fate and the fate of all the children on the planet are inextricably linked. As if the children in Israel and Gaza and Ukraine were all of them our very own, which is what they are.